functions, f of x and g of x. Again, no square roots, so this one won't be hard either. We just need to find the explicit equation, and then just the domain, so we don't even have to graph it, we just have to do the domain. Again, the domain is going to be easy once you have the explicit equation. Like, this has a non-permissible value, right? X can't equal negative 3. This is everything. We'll see what happens with both of these functions. So the explicit equation, g of f of x, well, that would equal g of 1 over x plus 3. And what does that mean if you plug that into g of x? You will get, well, g of x says whatever you plug in gets squared minus 4 times it again. So see how that function notation works? Whatever you plug in is going to get squared minus 4 times whatever you plug in. And then from this, this is going to be 1 over, you all right if I just write this like this? If I wanted to combine those to a single fraction, I would need to get a common denominator, which means I'd have to multiply this one by x plus 3 and x plus 3. And my final answer would be 1 minus 4x plus 12 over x plus 3 squared. What is our domain? X can't equal negative 3 because it would cause you to divide by 0. I'll do B in blue. F of g of x. So now g of x says whatever you plug in, it'll just be x squared minus 4x. That's not an x. And f says whatever you plug in, you do 1 over that and add 3. Which, I could take the bottom there and they could factor that to be x minus 3, x minus 1. And it's really interesting because the domain of this one is that x can't equal 3 and x can't equal 1. Totally different. Two things that are not allowed. Right? That family has 2 boxes up in their garage that say never, ever, ever put these numbers in. Right? First machine, there's no problem. Anything can go into the first machine. But then in the second machine, there's 2 numbers that cause you problems now. The 3 and the 1. Okay. Questions for practice is question 6D, and I actually want to do it together. So I guess if we do it together, we have no question for practice. So let's do 6D together. It tells you that f of x, you can just turn to it, is 1 over x minus 1. It's on page 317. And it tells you g of x, but you can ignore it because the question says figure out f of x. And the reason I wanted to do this one together is because it involves complex fractions, which you haven't seen since identities. Complex fractions are where you have fractions inside of fractions, which happened a lot in identities, but it can happen in other units as well. So first of all, f of x is 1 over x minus 1. And so f of x would be 1 over, and whatever the x is gets replaced with 1 over x minus 1 minus 1. So we have to review, how do we deal with fractions inside of fractions? And the main strategy we used was, can you get a single fraction in your overall numerator and a single fraction in your overall denominator? And the answer is yes. Here I'm going to multiply this to get a common denominator by x minus 1 over x minus 1. My top fraction technically is already a fraction. It's 1 over 1. Right? It's just a 1. I can make it 1 over 1. The bottom now will be 1 minus, and if I distribute this, x plus 1 over x minus 1. So the bottom will be minus x plus 2 over x plus 1, minus 1. And now how do you divide fractions? We multiply by the reciprocal. And the other reason I wanted to look at this question was to talk about the domain. See my final answer? What number is going to be bad? 2. Can you see that if you plugged in 2, that would be bad? However, if you just did that for your domain, you would lose marks on this question. Because the domain for anything, if we think about the F machine happening twice, okay? The first machine is 1 over x minus 1. And the second machine is doing that again. The first machine, if you threw a 1 into the first machine, it would blow up even before it got into the second machine. So when we're figuring out domain, we need to check denominators everywhere. And some of them I highlighted more than once, but I have to check all of my denominators because I am never, ever, ever allowed to divide by 0. And so I would have, if I plugged in 1, divided by 0 early and caused a problem. So if I put in 1, the first machine blows up. If I plug in 2, I could plug in 2 into the first machine, no problem. It would go through and be, out would come a 1. Be like, yeah, see, no problem. But then that 1 would go on that conveyor belt, go into machine 2, and boom, blow up machine 2 right after that. So when we're checking domain, we have to check everywhere and every situation that is not allowed. And for math this year, well, from previous years, you knew you couldn't divide by 0. You know that you can't take the square root of negatives. This year, we've added that you can't take log of 0 or log of negatives, so that could be in there. So there are some new values that aren't allowed in domains this year. But for the most part in these chapters, they check square roots and dividing as non-permissible values. Right. So with that, we will leave question 3 and 4 for tomorrow.